The sound of a silver tray hitting a marble floor is distinct. It rings like a church bell, or in this case a funeral toll. In the high-stakes world of New York's underworld, silence is gold, but noise is a weapon. When Elara Vance, a nobody waitress with shaking hands, leaned down to pour wine for Lorenzo Moretti, the most feared man on the East Coast, she didn't tremble out of fear. She trembled because she knew the secret that was about to paint the walls red. She whispered 7 words that changed history run when I dropped the tray. What happened next wasn't a getaway. It was a war. The restaurant was called L'Orologio, named after the antique grandfather clock that stood like a sentry in the foyer. It was the kind of place where the menu had no prices. The lighting was dim enough to hide sins, and the clientele arrived in armored SUVs. Elara Vance adjusted the collar of her stiff white uniform. Her feet throbbed. Double shifts were the only way to keep the lights on in her cramped Queen's apartment, especially with her brother's medical bills piling up like snowdrifts against the door. She was 24, invisible and tired. In this restaurant, she wasn't a person. She was a pair of floating hands delivering filet mignon and vintage Barolo. Table 4. The maitre d', a sour-faced man named Claude, snapped his fingers near her ear. The Moretti party. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not make eye contact. And for the love of God, Elara, keep your hands steady. Elara nodded, picking up the heavy silver tray loaded with crystal glasses. She didn't need to be told who was at table 4. The air in the restaurant had changed the moment they walked in. The chatter had dropped a decibel. The piano player had skipped a note. Lorenzo Moretti sat at the head of the booth. He was younger than the tabloids made him look, maybe early 30s, wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than Elara would make in 5 years. He had the kind of face that belonged on a Roman coin, sharp, imperious, and utterly unreadable. His eyes were dark, scanning the room with the predatory focus of a hawk looking for a field mouse. Sitting to his right was his second-in-command, a bulky man with a jagged scar named Dario. To his left sat a man Elara didn't recognize, a thin, nervous-looking man with slicked-back blonde hair, tapping a heavy gold ring against the table. Elara approached the table, the phantom presence. As she began to place the water glasses, she tuned them out. It was a survival mechanism. If you listened to the conversations at L'Orologio, you ended up in a landfill in Jersey. But then the thin man, the blonde one, shifted his leg. He bumped the table leg, causing Elara to pause. "Tonight, Dario," the thin man murmured, his voice barely a breath. "The dessert course. The kitchen door is unlocked." Elara froze for a fraction of a second. It was innocuous enough except for the look Dario shot him. It wasn't a look of hunger for tiramisu. It was a look of finalized confirmation. Dario glanced at his watch, then subtly at the kitchen swing doors where the buses came in and out. Then his hand drifted inside his jacket, not reaching for a wallet, but resting there. Lorenzo Moretti was looking at the wine list, seemingly bored. He didn't see Dario's hand. He didn't see the thin man check the exit. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She knew that look. Her father had been a gambler, a man who lived on the edge until the edge swallowed him. She knew the tension of a room right before a table flip. They were going to kill him. Here. Now. If she did nothing, she walked away. She went home, fed her cat, and watched the news about a mob hit in the morning. But if the bullets started flying, the staff were collateral damage. She was standing right in the crossfire. She popped the cork of the sparkling water. Lorenzo looked up. For a second, his eyes met hers. They were sorto. Deadhole. Terrifying, but intelligent. He saw her shaking hand. "Do it!" her mind screamed. "Do it or die." Elara leaned in to pour the water into Lorenzo's crystal goblet. She moved into his personal space, a breach of protocol that made Dario stiffen. "More water, sir," she asked loudly for the table to hear. Then, as she leaned closer under the cover of the clinking bottle, she let out a breath of air that formed words only he could hear. "Run when I drop the tray." Lorenzo didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He took a sip of water, his gaze locking onto hers with a sudden piercing intensity. He assessed her in a microsecond, the fear in her eyes, the sweat on her hairline, the sincerity. He was a man who survived on instinct, and his instinct just screamed danger. He set the glass down. He tapped his finger once on the tablecloth. Acknowledgement. Elara stepped back. Her legs felt like jelly. She looked at Dario. He was smiling now, a cruel, anticipatory smile. He pulled a pack of cigarettes from his pocket, signaling the thin man. Elara took a deep breath. She thought of her brother. She thought of the rent. She gripped the heavy silver tray with both hands. 1, 2, 3. She didn't just drop it. She threw it downward with force. The crash was cataclysmic. Heavy silver shattering crystal and water exploded against the marble floor with the violence of a grenade. The entire restaurant jumped. Heads turned. But Lorenzo Moretti was already moving. Before the echo of the tray hitting the floor had faded, Lorenzo had kicked the heavy oak table upward. The table slammed into the chest of the thin man, pinning him against the booth, just as he was drawing a suppressed pistol. A thwip-thwip sound tore through the tablecloth, burying bullets into the ceiling instead of Lorenzo's chest. "Down!" Lorenzo roared, his voice a baritone command that shattered the sophisticated veneer of the dining room. Chaos erupted. Dario, realizing the ambush was blown, scrambled backward, knocking over his chair. He pulled a matte black handgun from his jacket. "Kill him! Now!" he screamed, abandoning all subtlety. Two diners at a nearby table stood up, drawing weapons. They were plants. The whole room was a kill box. Elara stood frozen, the adrenaline locking her muscles. She was staring at the broken glass, unable to process that she had actually done it. She expected to die. Suddenly, a hand made of iron clamped around her wrist. "Move!" Lorenzo yanked her down just as a bullet shattered the pillar behind where her head had been a second ago. He didn't let go. He dragged her behind the overturned table, using the heavy wood as a shield. Wood chips exploded around them as bullets chewed into the furniture. "Why the hell did you do that?" Lorenzo yelled over the gunfire, pulling a sleek silver beretta from an ankle holster Elara hadn't noticed. "I don't know!" she screamed back, pressing her hands over her ears. "They were going to kill you at dessert. Review's gonna be terrible," Lorenzo grunted. He popped up, fired 2 precise shots, bang, bang, and ducked back down. A scream from the thin man confirmed a hit. "Kitchen, now," Lorenzo ordered. He looked at her. Really looked at her. "You know the layout?" "Yes. Lead. Stay low. If you stop, you die." They moved as a single unit, crouching low. Elara scrambled over the broken glass, her knees getting sliced, but she didn't feel the pain. She burst through the swinging kitchen doors, with Lorenzo covering her rear. The kitchen was a madhouse. Chefs were screaming, pots were boiling over. "Out the back, go!" Lorenzo shouted at the staff, firing a warning shot into the ceiling to clear the path. The kitchen brigade scattered like roaches. Dario burst through the doors behind them. Lorenzo spun, firing blindly to suppress him. A copper pot exploded, showering them in marinara sauce. "The loading dock!" Elara grabbed Lorenzo's jacket, pulling him toward the heavy steel delivery doors. "My car is parked there." "Your car!" Lorenzo scoffed, reloading his weapon with a fluid, practiced motion. "I have an armored Mercedes out front. Your driver is dead, you idiot. I saw Dario text someone right before I dropped the tray." Lorenzo paused for a fraction of a second. The realization hit him. The betrayal was total. If the driver was compromised, the Mercedes was a coffin. "Lead the way, Waitress," he growled. They burst out into the cool, rainy night of the alleyway. The smell of wet garbage and ozone filled the air. Elara sprinted toward a beat-up, rusted 2008 Honda Civic. "You have got to be kidding me," Lorenzo muttered, looking at the dented bumper. "It runs, get in." Elara unlocked the door. Lorenzo dove into the passenger seat just as the kitchen door flew open again. Dario stood there, flanked by 2 gunmen. Elara turned the key. The engine sputtered. Come on, baby," she pleaded. "They're taking aim," Lorenzo shouted. He didn't shoot back. He was out of ammo. The engine roared to life with a sickly cough. Elara slammed it into reverse. The tires squealed against the wet asphalt. She didn't back away from them. She reversed toward them, swinging the back of the car around like a club. Dario jumped back to avoid being crushed against the loading dock. Elara shifted to drive and floored it. The Honda whined in protest, speeding down the alleyway as bullets sparked off the pavement and shattered the rear windshield. Glass rained down on them. Elara screamed, ducking her head but keeping the wheel straight. They burst out of the alley onto the main avenue, cutting off a taxi that honked aggressively. Elara wove through traffic, running 2 red lights, her heart rate hovering somewhere around lethal. She drove for 10 minutes in silence, taking random turns, checking the rearview mirror until the flashing lights of the restaurant were far behind. Finally, she pulled into a dark, abandoned construction site under a bridge, a place she used to go to smoke when life got too heavy. She killed the engine. The silence that filled the car was heavier than the gunfire. The rain hammered against the roof. Elara was hyperventilating. Her hands were shaking so hard she couldn't let go of the steering wheel. Lorenzo sat perfectly still. He checked the side mirror, then the front. He seemed unbothered by the fact that he was in a rusted Honda Civic, covered in drywall dust and glass. He slowly turned his head to look at her. The darkness of the car hid his eyes, but she could feel the weight of his stare. "You're bleeding," he said softly. Elara looked down. Her white uniform was stained red at the shoulder. A graze. She hadn't even felt it. I... She couldn't form words. Lorenzo reached into his jacket. For a terrifying second, Elara thought he was going to kill her. No loose ends. She braced herself. Instead, he pulled out a pristine white handkerchief and pressed it against her shoulder. His hands were warm, steady, and surprisingly gentle. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice low, lacking the aggression from earlier. "Elara," she whispered. "Elara Vance." "Well, Elara Vance," Lorenzo said, leaning back and staring at the rain dripping through the shattered back window. "You just saved the life of the head of the Moretti crime family. And in doing so, you just became the most hunted woman in New York City." He turned to her, a grim smile playing on his lips. "Drive. We have work to do." The silence in the Honda Civic was no longer empty. It was heavy, suffocating, filled with the metallic scent of adrenaline and copper. The rain in Queens had turned into a deluge, drumming a relentless rhythm against the roof, masking the sound of Ilara's ragged breathing. "Turn left here," Lorenzo said. His voice was calm, terrifyingly so. It wasn't the voice of a man who had just survived an assassination attempt. It was the voice of a man reading a grocery list. "Take the bridge. We're going to Brooklyn. Carroll Gardens." Ilara's hands gripped the wheel until her knuckles turned white. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a cold, shivering shock. The pain in her shoulder, previously just a dull throb, was now waking up, screaming for attention with every turn of the steering wheel. "My brother," Ilara whispered, her voice cracking. "I have to pick up his medication at 6. If I don't go home..." "If you go home..." Lorenzo cut her off, staring out of the window at the blurred city lights. "Dario will be waiting in your living room. He will peel your skin off just to ask where I am. You don't have a home anymore, Ilara. Not tonight." The brutality of the statement made her flinch. She looked at him in the rearview mirror. He was pressing the handkerchief to her shoulder, his eyes closed, his face a mask of concentration. He was calculating. Chess pieces were moving in his head. They drove for 40 minutes, navigating the back streets to avoid traffic cameras. Lorenzo directed her to a row of brownstones on a tree-lined street that looked too peaceful for the violence sitting in her passenger seat. "Stop here. Keep the engine running for 10 seconds. If no lights turn on in the house across the street, kill it." They waited. The street remained dark. "Inside, quickly!" Ilara stumbled as she got out of the car. Her knees buckled, but Lorenzo was there instantly. He didn't grab her with the roughness of a criminal. He supported her weight with a firm, steady arm around her waist. For a man who dealt in death, his touch was surprisingly anchoring. They entered the brownstone. It smelled of lemon polish and stale air. It was a ghost house, a property owned by a shell company, kept fully furnished and empty for emergencies, just like this. Lorenzo locked the door, sliding 3 heavy deadbolts into place. He moved to the window, peering through the blinds before turning his attention to her. "Kitchen. Sit on the counter. The light is better there." Ilara obeyed, her legs swinging uselessly as she hoisted herself onto the marble island. The kitchen was pristine, a stark contrast to the blood soaking the shoulder of her cheap polyester uniform. Lorenzo took off his suit jacket. Underneath he wore a white dress shirt, now splattered with marinara sauce and specks of blood. He rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms corded with muscle and a faint, faded scar running down his left wrist. He began rummaging through the drawers until he found a first aid kit that looked more like a military field trauma pack. "This is going to hurt," he said, stepping between her knees to get a better look at the wound. He poured alcohol over a piece of gauze. The smell hit Ilara's nose, sharp and clinical. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling. Lorenzo paused, the gauze hovering inches from her skin. "Why is it going to hurt? Because alcohol burns." "No." Ilara looked up, meeting his dark eyes. "Why did you trust me in the restaurant? I could have been one of them. I could have been distracting you." Lorenzo stared at her. The distance between them was negligible. She could see the flecks of gold in his irises, the slight stubble on his jaw. "You were shaking," he said softly. "Assassins don't shake. Liars don't shake. Only people who are terrified, but doing the right thing, shake like that." He pressed the alcohol-soaked gauze to her shoulder. Ilara hissed, biting her lip so hard she tasted iron. Tears pricked her eyes, but she didn't pull away. She watched his hands. They were precise, surgical. He cleaned the graze, which was deep, but hadn't hit the bone. "It needs stitches," he murmured. "I can do it. But I don't have lidocaine." "Just do it." Elara breathed out, closing her eyes. I've had worse. I doubt that. Lorenzo threaded a curved needle. Talk to me. Distract yourself. Tell me about the brother you're so worried about. As the needle pierced her skin, Elara gasped, her fingers digging into Lorenzo's forearms. He didn't flinch at her nails digging into his flesh. He just kept working quick and steady. His name is Toby. Elara gasped, focusing on the pain to keep from passing out. He's 19. Cystic fibrosis. He needs enzymes, oxygen. The bills are astronomical. And that's why you work double shifts at l'orologio, Lorenzo said, tying off the first stitch. To keep Toby breathing. Yes? You're a good sister, Elara. I'm a waitress, she corrected him, opening her eyes. I serve pasta. I don't save mob bosses. Lorenzo finished the last stitch and taped a bandage over the wound. He stepped back, wiping his hands on a towel. He looked at her, really looked at her, seeing past the uniform and the blood. You're not a waitress anymore, Lorenzo said, his voice dropping an octave heavy with a promise that terrified her. You saved Lorenzo Moretti. That makes you family. And family is the only thing I don't kill. He turned away to wash his hands in the sink. The water ran red for a moment before turning clear. But Dario, Lorenzo said, his voice hardening, shifting from the savior back to the monster. Dario is family too, and that is why I'm going to make him suffer before he dies. The atmosphere in the brownstone shifted. The intimacy of the kitchen surgery evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard, tactical silence of a war room. Lorenzo moved into the living room. He didn't sit. He paced. He was a caged tiger energy rolling off him in waves. He found a burner phone taped under the drawer of an antique writing desk, standard protocol for his safe houses. Elara remained in the kitchen, shivering slightly despite the warmth of the house. She watched him through the doorway. He was dialing a number from memory. It's me, Lorenzo said into the phone. No greeting, no code words, just his voice, which was authentication enough. He listened for a long time. His jaw tightened. The muscles in his neck corded. Silence, he commanded the person on the other end. Do not move assets. Do not initiate the contingency. If Dario thinks I'm dead, let him think it for another hour. Who is the acting capo? No, he's weak. Listen to me. I need the footage from the restaurant, the security feed. I need to know who the blonde man was. Elara slid off the counter. Her legs felt heavy, but her mind was starting to clear. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a strange, hyper-aware focus. His name was Elias, she said. Lorenzo froze. He slowly lowered the phone from his ear. He turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. What did you say? The blonde man, Elara said, walking to the doorway, leaning against the frame for support. The one you kicked the table into. His name was Elias. Or, at least that's what the notification on his phone said. Lorenzo hung up the phone without saying goodbye. He walked over to her, his intensity overwhelming. Explain. Every detail. Now. When I was pouring the water, Elara said, her mind flashing back to the scent of expensive cologne and fear. His phone was on the table face up. A message came through. It was locked, but the preview showed the name. Sender the architect. The message said, Elias confirm visual on target. Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. The architect, he whispered. The name seemed to suck the air out of the room. He ran a hand through his dark hair, pacing away from her again. That's not a local player. That's international. Mercenaries. Dario didn't just betray me. He sold me. He looked back at Alara with a newfound respect. She wasn't just a pair of hands. She was observant. In her line of work, being invisible meant you saw everything. What else? Lorenzo pressed. Think, Alara. Before the tray dropped, did Dario say anything? Did he look at anyone? He looked at the kitchen. Alara recalled closing her eyes to reconstruct the scene. Not at the chef's, at the back exit. He tapped his watch. It was 8:12 p.m. The shift change, Lorenzo realized. He timed it for the shift change so the alley would be less crowded. Smart. Sloppy but smart. He walked over to a heavy wooden cabinet and opened it. Inside was a small arsenal cash passports and 2 Glock 19s. He checked the magazine of one and tucked it into his waistband. We have a problem, Alara, Lorenzo said, turning to face her. Dario knows he missed. He knows I'm alive because his men in the alley saw us leave. He also knows you're driving a 2008 Honda Civic registered to an Alara Vance in Queens. Alara's stomach dropped. He knows who I am. He knows your name, your address, and thanks to public records. Lorenzo hesitated, a flicker of genuine regret crossing his face. He knows about Toby. We have to go get him, Alara screamed, pushing herself off the doorframe. The pain in her shoulder was forgotten. We have to go to the hospital. Now take me to him. Alara, stop! Lorenzo grabbed her uninjured shoulder as she tried to rush past him. Think if Dario knows about Toby. Where is the first place he sends his men? The apartment. Numb. The hospital. I don't care, she sobbed, struggling against his grip. He's helpless. He's hooked up to machines. If they hurt him, they won't hurt him yet, Lorenzo said, shaking her slightly to make her listen. He is leverage. They will use him to draw you out. And if you go there now, you die. And if you die, Toby definitely dies. Alara collapsed against his chest, her fight draining away. She grabbed the lapels of his ruined shirt, sobbing into the expensive fabric. Please, please save him. You have men, right? Send them. Lorenzo held her. It was awkward for him. He was a man of violence, not comfort, but he rested his chin on the top of her head. I can't use my men, he admitted quietly. I don't know who is loyal. If I call the wrong captain, I send the executioner directly to your brother's bedside. I am alone in this Alara, until I find out how deep the rot goes. I am a king without an army. He pulled back, holding her face in his hands. His thumbs wiped away the tears on her cheeks. But I am still Lorenzo Moretti, and I promise you on my mother's grave, I will get your brother. But we have to do it my way. We have to be ghosts. Suddenly the burner phone on the desk buzzed. Not a call. A text. Lorenzo frowned. Nobody had this number except the one person he had just called his consigliere, Marco. He picked it up. His face went pale, a color Alara didn't think he was capable of. What? She whispered. What is it? Lorenzo turned the phone screen toward her. It wasn't a text from Marco. It was a picture. It was a grainy photo taken from a distance showing a hospital bed. A boy with pale skin and an oxygen tube was sleeping. Standing over him, smiling at the camera, was Dario. Below the image was a simple caption. The tray dropped, but the other shoe hasn't. Bring me the waitress Lorenzo, or I unplug the machine. Lorenzo looked at Alara, his eyes burning with a cold blue fire. Dario just made the last mistake of his life. The image on the phone screen didn't just threaten violence, it promised an atrocity. Elara stared at the pixelated image of her brother. Toby looked so small in the hospital bed, a fragile collection of bones and translucent skin amidst a tangle of tubes. And there, standing like a dark reaper in a designer suit, was Dario. His hand wasn't on a gun. It was hovering over the power cord of the ventilator. Elara felt the floor of the brownstone tilt. The air left her lungs. He's going to kill him. He's going to turn it off. I have to go. She turned for the door blind, with panic fueled by a sister's primal instinct. Stop! Lorenzo didn't shout. He didn't move to block her. He simply spoke the word with such heavy, absolute authority that Elara's feet froze to the floorboards. If you walk out that door, Lorenzo said, his voice low and devoid of emotion. You act exactly as Dario predicts. You run to the hospital. You scream. You beg. And then Dario puts a bullet in your head and pulls the plug anyway, just to watch the light go out in your eyes before you die. Is that what you want? Elara spun around, her face wet with tears, her hands trembling. Then what do I do? That is my brother. He can't breathe on his own. Lorenzo. He can't run. I know. Lorenzo walked over to the desk and picked up the phone. He stared at the image not with fear, but with the cold, analytical gaze of a forensic scientist. Dario is arrogant. Look at the photo. He turned the screen to her. He's smiling. He's looking at the lens. He's enjoying the theater of it. But look behind him. Lorenzo zoomed in on the reflection in the glass partition of the ICU room. He's alone in the room. He has men in the hallway, surely. But inside, he wants the intimacy of the kill. He wants to be the one to end it. Lorenzo set the phone down. He is baiting a trap, and we are going to walk right into it, but not as prey. He moved toward the hallway, gesturing for her to follow. They descended a narrow flight of stairs into the basement. It wasn't a storage cellar. It was a reinforced concrete bunker. Along one wall, a metal rack held weapons that looked terrifyingly professional. Lorenzo began to strip off his ruined dress shirt. He moved with efficiency, ignoring Elara's presence, as he changed into a black tactical turtleneck and dark, heavy canvas trousers. He pulled a Kevlar vest over his head, tightening the Velcro straps with a sharp rip-rip sound. Elara, he said, his back to her as he loaded a fresh magazine into a matte black pistol. You know the hospital. You've spent months there. Every day, she whispered, watching the transformation. The elegant businessman was gone. The warlord had arrived. The ICU is on the 4th floor, Lorenzo stated. Standard access is the elevator bank and the main stairwell. Dario will have eyes on both. Where are the blind spots? Elara closed her eyes, forcing herself to visualize the hospital, not as a place of healing, but as a blueprint. The laundry chutes, she said softly, and the service elevator for the bio-waste. It requires a key card, but the staff leave the loading dock doors propped open for smoke breaks around 9 p.m. That's in 20 minutes. Lorenzo turned to her. He picked up a small, serrated knife in a leather sheath and held it out. Take it. Elara stared at the weapon. I can't use that. You hope you don't have to, Lorenzo corrected her. But tonight, the world is not polite. Tonight, the world is sharp edges. If someone grabs you, you don't ask them to stop. You make them let go. Elara reached out. Her hand shook, but she took the cold leather of the sheath. It felt heavy, heavier than a tray of drinks. It felt like a sentence. She clipped it to the waistband of her uniform pants, hidden beneath her apron, which she refused to take off. It was her armor. Lorenzo grabbed a heavy black trench coat and threw it on, concealing the vest and the holsters. He looked at her, his dark eyes softening for the briefest of seconds. "I cannot promise you that Toby survives," he said, the brutal honesty hanging between them like smoke. "But I promise you that Dario will not leave that room alive." "Why?" Elara asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why risk everything for me? You could disappear. You have money. You could run." Lorenzo paused at the bottom of the stairs. He looked at his hands, hands that had done terrible things. Hands that now held the keys to her brother's life. "Because you dropped the tray," he said simply. "In a world of sticks, you were the only one who hissed a warning. I don't owe debts, Elara, but I pay them." He opened the basement door, leading to the rear garage. "Let's go hunting." St. Jude's Hospital loomed against the night sky like a fortress of glass and concrete. The rain had stopped leaving the streets, slick and black, reflecting the red neon of the emergency room sign. Lorenzo parked the battered Honda Civic 3 blocks away in the shadow of a railway bridge. They walked the rest of the distance in silence, keeping to the dark patches between streetlights. Lorenzo moved differently now. In the restaurant he had walked with the arrogance of ownership. Now he moved with the silence of a predator. He checked corners before turning his body angled to shield Elara. "The loading dock," Lorenzo whispered as they approached the rear of the massive building. Elara nodded. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, so hard she thought it would crack the bone. The smell of the hospital hit her before they even entered that mixture of industrial bleach exhaust fumes and damp cardboard. Sure enough, a heavy steel door was propped open with a plastic crate. 2 orderlies were standing outside smoking cigarettes, complaining about their shift supervisor. Lorenzo pulled Elara into the shadows of a dumpster. "Wait." He waited for the orderlies to flick their cigarettes into a puddle and head back inside. The moment the door began to swing shut, Lorenzo moved. He was a blur of black motion, catching the door before it clicked into the lock. He waved Elara forward. They slipped into the humid warmth of the hospital's underbelly. The corridors here were grey concrete, lined with pipes that hissed and clanked. It was a labyrinth of laundry carts and hazardous waste bins. "Elevator," Elara whispered, pointing to a scuffed set of steel doors at the end of the hall. "That goes to the basement, the kitchen, and the ICU supply closet." Lorenzo pressed the button. They waited. The hum of the elevator descending felt deafening in the silence. Ding! The doors slid open. It was empty. They stepped inside. Lorenzo hit the button for the 4th floor. As the numbers ticked up, he pulled the gun from his holster, holding it low against his thigh. "When the doors open," Lorenzo murmured close to her ear, "you stay behind me. If I say down, you drop. If I say run, you run. You don't look back for me. Do you understand? I'm not leaving without Toby," Elara said, her voice shaking but stubborn. Lorenzo didn't argue. He just watched the numbers. 2, 3, 4. The elevator slowed. Lorenzo shifted his stance, raising the weapon slightly. The doors opened. They weren't in the main lobby. They were in a supply closet filled with stacks of sterile gowns and saline drips. The room was dark, lit only by the light from the hallway creeping under the door. Lorenzo pushed the door open a crack. He peered out. The ICU hallway was usually quiet at night, filled only with the rhythmic beeping of monitors. But tonight the tension was palpable. 50 feet down the hall outside room 404 sat a man in a visitor's chair. He was reading a magazine, but his posture was wrong. He wasn't slouching like a tired relative. He was rigid. His hand was inside his jacket. "One guard," Lorenzo whispered. "That I can see." "There's usually a nurse station right around the corner," Elara breathed. "If the alarm goes off." "Dario will have moved the nurses," Lorenzo deduced. "He emptied the floor. It's just us and them." Lorenzo turned to Elara. "Stay here." "No." She grabbed his arm. "That guard, that's Marco. He's not one of Dario's men. He's the one who brings Toby comic books sometimes. He works for the family." Lorenzo frowned. "Marco." "The driver? No, a different Marco. He's low level. A kid. If he is sitting outside that door, he is working for Dario now," Lorenzo said coldly. "Loyalty has an expiration date." Lorenzo slipped out of the closet. He didn't run. He walked casually, holstering his gun, but keeping his hand on it inside his coat. He looked like a doctor in a hurry, head down. The guard, the kid named Marco, looked up. He squinted. "Hey, floor's closed. You can't." Lorenzo was 10 feet away when he looked up. The recognition on the kid's face was instantaneous. His eyes went wide. He had been told Lorenzo Moretti was dead. Seeing a ghost paralyzed him for the crucial second Lorenzo needed. "Boss," the kid stammered, his hand half reaching for his weapon. Lorenzo didn't stop. He closed the distance in 2 strides. He didn't draw his gun. He slammed his open palm into the kid's windpipe, stifling the scream, and then drove his knee into the boy's solar plexus. The kid folded. Lorenzo grabbed him by the collar and dragged him silently into the adjacent linen room, kicking the door shut. Elara watched from the supply closet, her hand over her mouth. It was brutal, efficient, and soundless. 10 seconds later, Lorenzo emerged. He adjusted his coat. He motioned for her. Elara ran to him, her sneakers squeaking softly on the linoleum. "Did you—" "He's asleep," Lorenzo said curtly. "I don't kill kids unless I have to, but he won't wake up for an hour." They were now standing 10 feet from room 404. The blinds were drawn, but the slats were open just enough to see inside. The rhythmic whoosh-hiss of the ventilator was audible through the glass. Lorenzo pressed his back against the wall next to the door. He signaled Elara to look. She peeked through the gap in the blinds. There was Toby. He looked peaceful, unaware that he was the center of a gang war. The heart monitor beeped a steady, slow rhythm. And there was Dario. He wasn't looking at the door. He was sitting in the chair next to the bed, holding a gun loosely in his lap. He was staring at his watch. "He's waiting for a call," Lorenzo whispered. "He's waiting for confirmation that his men found the car." Lorenzo checked his own weapon. He looked at Elara. The intensity in his eyes was terrifying. "This is the breach," he whispered. "I go in. He will try to use Toby as a shield. I need you to do something that goes against every instinct you have." "What?" Elara asked, tears welling up again. "When I kick that door," Lorenzo said, "Dario will look at me. For 1 second, he will be distracted. You need to enter behind me, stay low, and get between Dario and the machine. You have to shield the plug." "He'll shoot me," Elara said, her voice trembling. "He wants to shoot me," Lorenzo said. "You are just the waitress. He doesn't think you're a threat. That is your power. Be the ghost." Lorenzo took a deep breath. The predator was about to strike. On 3. Lorenzo didn't count out loud. He flashed 3 fingers. 2. 1. He didn't turn the handle. He kicked the door just below the lock. The wood splintered with a crack like a gunshot. The door flew inward, banging against the wall. Lorenzo surged into the room, his gun raised. "Dario!" he roared, his voice filling the small, sterile room. Dario spun around in the chair, eyes wide with shock. He raised his gun, but he was slow, too slow. But he didn't fire at Lorenzo. He smirked, his finger tightening on the trigger as he swung the barrel not toward Lorenzo, but toward the oxygen tank valve next to Toby's head. "I told you to run," Dario screamed. Lorenzo couldn't shoot. If he missed, the bullet would hit the oxygen tank and blow the room apart. Time seemed to suspend. And then a blur of white and grey shot past Lorenzo. Elara. She didn't run to Toby. She didn't cower. She threw herself at Dario. Elara Vance was not a fighter. She had never thrown a punch in her life. She was a girl who apologized to Poult when they got their own orders wrong. But fear is a potent fuel, and love is a blinding accelerant. When she saw the gun barrel swing toward the oxygen tank, toward the explosive gas that would incinerate her brother, she didn't think. She became a projectile. She slammed into Dario's side just as his finger squeezed the trigger. Bang! The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet went wide, shattering the glass partition of the room, raining shards down onto the sterile tile. Dario grunted, the wind knocked out of him by the unexpected weight of the collision. But he was a man twice her size, a seasoned enforcer who had strangled men with piano wire. He recovered instantly. He backhanded Elara across the face. The force of the blow sent her spinning. She crashed into the medical cart trays of instruments, clattering to the floor. Her vision swam a high-pitched ring, filling her ears. "Stupid bitch!" Dario roared, scrambling to his feet. He raised the gun again this time, aiming directly at Elara's chest. Lorenzo was there, but he couldn't shoot. Dario was smart. He kept his body angled so that Elara was partially between him and the door. If Lorenzo fired, the bullet could pass through Dario and hit her or ricochet off the machinery into the oxygen tank. "Drop it, Dario," Lorenzo shouted, stepping further into the room, his weapon trained on Dario's left eye. "It's over. It's over when I say it is." Dario screamed, his face purple with rage and adrenaline. He grabbed Elara by her hair, yanking her up as a human shield. "You think you're a god, Lorenzo, you're just a man, and tonight you watch your pet die." Elara felt the cold steel of the gun barrel press against her temple. She could smell Dario's sweat, acrid and sour. She looked at Toby, still sleeping the machine, breathing for him. Hiss, click, hiss. Lorenzo froze. His eyes locked onto Elara's. For the first time since the restaurant, she saw genuine fear in them. Not for himself, but for her. He lowered his gun an inch. "Let her go," Lorenzo said, his voice dropping to a barter. "You want the territory? Take it. You want the roots? They're yours. Just walk away." Dario laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "I already have the territory, Lorenzo. The architect gave it to me. Now I just need your corpse." Dario's finger tightened on the trigger. Elara's hand brushed against her waist. The apron. Beneath it, the cold leather sheath. "The world is sharp edges," Lorenzo had said. She didn't scream. She didn't struggle. She went limp for a fraction of a second, causing Dario to adjust his grip. In that micro moment of instability, she ripped the serrated knife from her waistband. She didn't aim. She just drove the blade backward blindly with every ounce of strength she possessed. The knife sank deep into Dario's thigh, severing the quadriceps and hitting the femoral artery. Dario howled a sound of pure, animalistic shock. His grip on her hair loosened. His leg buckled. Elara dropped to the floor, rolling away toward the bed. The shield was gone. Lorenzo didn't hesitate. He didn't blink. He fired twice. Thwip. Thwip. The suppressor dampened the noise, but the impact was visceral. Both bullets struck Dario in the center of his chest. The traitor stumbled back, his eyes wide with disbelief. He looked down at the red blossoms, spreading on his shirt, then up at Lorenzo. He tried to speak, but only blood bubbled past his lips. He collapsed backward, hitting the wall and sliding down into a sitting position. The gun fell from his hand. Silence rushed back into the room, heavier than before. The only sound was the hiss-click-hiss of Toby's ventilator. Elara lay on the floor, gasping for air, her cheek pressed against the cold tiles. She watched as Lorenzo holstered his weapon and walked over to Dario. He checked the pulse. Nothing. Lorenzo stood up and turned to her. He didn't look like a mob boss. He looked like a man who had walked through fire. He knelt beside her, his hands hovering, unsure where to touch her, afraid he might break her. "Elara," he whispered. She sat up, trembling uncontrollably. "Is he?" "He's gone," Lorenzo said. He reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from her bruising face. "You did it. You saved us." "I stabbed him," she whispered, looking at her hands. They were shaking. "I actually stabbed him." "You survived," Lorenzo corrected her. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. The smell of gunpowder and rain clung to him, but beneath it was the warmth of a living heart. "You survived." Suddenly the hallway erupted with noise, shouting, heavy boots. Elara stiffened. "The police!" Lorenzo listened. He stood up, pulling her with him. He walked to the shattered window and looked out. Down on the street, black SUVs were screeching to a halt, boxing in the police cruisers that were just arriving. Men in dark suits were pouring out, forming a perimeter. Lorenzo turned back to her, a grim smile playing on his lips. "Not the police," he said. "My men, the loyal ones. Marco came through." The door to the room burst open. But it wasn't enemies. It was the older Marco Lorenzo's consigliere, flanked by 4 armed guards. They saw the body of Dario, the shattered glass, and their boss standing amidst the wreckage. Marco looked at Dario's body, then at Lorenzo. He bowed his head slightly. "Don Lorenzo, the architect's men have been intercepted at the bridge. The family is secure." Lorenzo nodded. He didn't look at his men. He looked at Elara, then at the sleeping boy in the bed. "Secure this floor," Lorenzo commanded. "Get a private medical team here immediately. Not hospital staff. Our doctors. This boy is to be moved to the penthouse suite at the plaza. Full ICU set up. If he so much as coughs, I want to know about it." "Yes, boss," Marco said. He looked at Elara with new eyes, not as a civilian, but as someone who stood in the fire. "And the girl," Lorenzo placed a hand on Elara's shoulder. It wasn't a claim of ownership. It was a shield. "The girl," Lorenzo said, his voice echoing with finality, "is with me." Six months later. The reopening of L'Orologio was the social event of the season. The restaurant had been renovated. The bullet holes in the ceiling were gone, replaced by frescoes. The marble floor where the tray had dropped was polished to a mirror shine. The clientele was the same politicians, celebrities and men who ran the city from the shadows. But the atmosphere was different. The fear was gone, replaced by a deep, respectful reverence. In the corner booth, table 4, Lorenzo Moretti sat. He looked the same, perhaps a little sharper, a little more guarded. But he wasn't looking at the door. He was watching the floor. A woman walked through the dining room. She wasn't wearing a waitress uniform. She was wearing a midnight blue gown that flowed like water. Diamonds glittered at her throat, a gift, not a bribe. Elara Vance didn't carry a tray. She carried herself with the grace of a queen. She stopped at tables greeting guests by name, her smile warm but her eyes sharp. She saw everything. She saw the hands reaching into jackets. She saw the glances. She saw the power dynamics. She reached table 4. Lorenzo stood up. He pulled out the chair for her. "How is he?" Lorenzo asked as she sat. "Toby is good." Elara smiled, taking a sip of the vintage red wine that was already poured for her. "The new lungs are working perfectly. He's complaining about the physical therapy, which means he's back to his old self." "Good," Lorenzo said. He reached across the table and took her hand. His thumb traced the faint white scar on her knuckle, a souvenir from the night she punched a hitman. The music swelled. The chatter of the restaurant was a hum in the background. "Do you miss it?" Lorenzo asked quietly. "The quiet life, the anonymity." Elara looked around the room. She saw the respect in the eyes of the staff. She saw the safety she had built for her brother. And she looked at the man sitting across from her, the monster who had burned down the world to save her. "I was never invisible, Lorenzo," she said, softly leaning in. "I was just waiting for the right moment to make some noise." Lorenzo smiled, a rare, genuine smile that reached his eyes. He raised his glass. "To the noise," he said. Elara clinked her glass against his. The sound was distinct. It rang like a church bell. "To the tray," she whispered. And outside the city rain washed the streets clean. But inside the Queen of Queens sat beside her king. And for the first time in history, nobody dared to predict what would happen next. Because they knew better. And that is the story of Elara Vance and Lorenzo Moretti. What started with a dropped tray and a whispered warning turned into a battle for survival that redefined loyalty. It's a reminder that sometimes the quietest people in the room are the ones holding the most power. Elara didn't need a gun to start a war. She just needed the courage to speak up when everyone else was looking away. In a world of silence, she chose noise. What about you? If you saw a hit about to go down, would you keep your head down to survive? Or would you risk it all to warn a stranger? It's a question that's easy to answer now, but much harder when the gun is on the table. If this story had you holding your breath, do me a huge favor. Smash that like button right now. It helps the channel grow and tells me you want more gritty, high-stakes storytelling like this. Did you expect Elara to use the knife? Let me know in the comments below. What was your favorite twist? And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. I have another story coming next week about a bodyguard who fell in love with the target he was paid to eliminate. And trust me, you do not want to miss that one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.